The oven timer screamed at 4:47 a.m., and Sophie Chen's world smelled like burnt sugar and broken dreams. She lunged across her tiny bakery kitchen, yanking open the industrial oven door. Smoke billowed out, acrid and bitter. Inside, what should have been 3 dozen perfectly golden cannoli shells were now charcoal sculptures, twisted and black. "No, no, no," Sophie whispered, her voice cracking. She grabbed the tray with her bare hands, realized her mistake too late, and dropped it with a clatter that echoed through the empty shop. The shells shattered across the floor like fragile bones. Sophie stared at the mess, at her reddening palms, at the clock that said she had exactly 2 hours and 13 minutes before her first customer arrived. Mrs. Kowalski came every Saturday at 7 a.m. for her weekly order, 6 cannoli, filled fresh, never late, never canceled. One of the 12 regular customers keeping Sophie's sweet shop barely alive. 12 customers. In Brooklyn, in a neighborhood where bakeries fought for survival like dogs over scraps. Sophie sank onto the flour-dusted floor, pressed her burned hands against her face, and finally let herself admit the truth she'd been avoiding for months. She was failing. The bakery her grandmother had built, the one Sophie had promised to save, was dying, and she didn't know how to stop it. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Sophie's phone buzzed against the counter. She ignored it. It would be another bill, another reminder, another creditor asking for money she didn't have. The rent was 3 weeks overdue. The equipment loan payment had bounced, and her supplier had started demanding cash on delivery because her credit was shot. 28 years old, and she'd managed to destroy everything her grandmother had spent 40 years building. Sophie pushed herself up, wincing as her burned palms protested. The flour canister caught her eye, and she remembered. The recipe book. Her grandmother's recipe book. No, not her grandmother's. The recipe book that had lived in this bakery for 15 years, wrapped in oilcloth, hidden in the back of the storage closet behind the industrial mixer. The book Sophie had protected like a sacred text, never opening it, never using it, because it didn't belong to her. It belonged to a woman named Maria Santoro. And 15 years ago, when Sophie was 13 years old, Maria had pressed that book into her hands and made her promise something that had haunted Sophie ever since. 15 years earlier, the summer Sophie turned 13, her grandmother hired a woman to help in the bakery. Maria Santoro was elegant in a way that seemed impossible for someone wearing a flour-dusted apron. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Sad eyes that crinkled when she smiled. Hands that moved through dough like a sculptor, shaping marble. "Your grandmother tells me you want to be a real baker," Maria had said on her first day, studying Sophie with an intensity that made the girl squirm. "Yes, ma'am," Sophie had replied, suddenly shy. "Then I'll teach you. But you must promise to respect the craft, to honor what these recipes represent." Maria had worked at the bakery for 3 months. 3 perfect months when Sophie learned more than she'd learned in years. How to tell when dough was ready by touch, not timer. How to layer flavors so they sang instead of shouted. How to make sfogliatelle so delicate they shattered at the first bite. But more than recipes, Maria taught Sophie about legacy, about how food carried memory, about how every dish told a story of the hands that made it, the people who'd loved it, the moments it had marked. "My son," Maria had said one August afternoon, her voice distant. "He thinks I'm dead, or maybe he wishes I was. I don't know which is worse." Sophie had been rolling out pasta dough, her 13-year-old hands clumsy but determined. "Why does he think that?" "Because I left him. Because his world was too dark, too violent, and I couldn't watch him become what his father was." Maria's hands had stilled. "I ran, and I let him believe I was gone forever. Do you miss him?" "Every single day. But some loves mean letting go, even when it destroys you." The next morning, Maria didn't come to work. Sophie's grandmother made phone calls, asked questions, searched. But Maria Santoro had vanished as completely as morning fog. She left behind only one thing: a leather-bound recipe book, wrapped in oilcloth with a note in elegant handwriting. For Sophie, who understands that recipes are really love letters written in flour and sugar, keep this safe. If my son ever comes looking, give it to him. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him the biscotti recipe on page 47 was his father's favorite. Tell him I loved him enough to leave. M.S. Sophie's grandmother had wanted to find Maria's son, to return the book immediately. but they had no last name beyond Santoro, no address, no phone number. Just a recipe book filled with handwritten notes in Italian and English, with grease-stained pages and margin notes that read like prayers. "We'll keep it safe," Sophie's grandmother had decided. "If he comes, we'll be ready." But 15 years had passed. Sophie's grandmother had died 3 years ago, and no one had ever come looking for Maria Santoro's recipes. Sophie pulled the oilcloth bundle from its hiding place, her burned hands making her clumsy. The leather was still soft, well-preserved. She unwrapped it slowly, opened to a random page. Pane di Altamura. "My mother taught me this. Giovanni loved it fresh from the oven, still steaming. He would tear off pieces and dip them in olive oil. And for those few minutes, the violence would leave his eyes." Every recipe had notes like this. Little windows into a life Sophie had never known. Family torn apart by something dark that Maria had never fully explained. Sophie turned to page 47. The biscotti recipe. The margins were covered in notes. Nico's favorite. "He was 6 when I first made these. He ate an entire batch and made himself sick. I was so angry, but he just laughed and said they were worth it. The memory of his laugh still breaks me." Nico. Maria's son had a name. Sophie closed the book carefully, rewrapped it. She'd made a promise to a woman who'd vanished 15 years ago. A promise that had felt important when she was 13. Sacred, even. But now, at 28, drowning in debt, with a failing bakery and no way forward, Sophie made a decision. She would find Nico Santoro. She would return his mother's recipe book. And maybe, just maybe, keeping this one promise would balance out all the promises she'd broken. Maybe it would mean something that she'd protected this one thing, even as everything else crumbled. Sophie grabbed her laptop, burning palms be damned, and typed into Google, "Nico Santoro, Brooklyn." The search results loaded, and Sophie's blood turned to ice. The first result was a news article from the Brooklyn Daily. Domenico Nico Santoro acquitted in federal racketeering case. The second, Santoro family consolidates control of Red Hook waterfront. The third, who really runs Brooklyn? Inside the Santoro organization. Sophie clicked on the first article, her hands shaking. A photograph loaded. A man in an expensive suit, leaving a courthouse, surrounded by lawyers. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples. Sharp cheekbones. Eyes that looked like they could cut glass. And in those eyes, Sophie saw something she recognized from another pair of eyes, 15 years ago. Maria's sadness, Maria's intensity, Maria's capacity for love that felt like drowning. This was Maria's son, Nico Santoro, and according to every article Sophie could find, he was the head of one of Brooklyn's most powerful crime families. Maria hadn't been running from a bad neighborhood or a difficult past. She'd been running from the Mafia, from her own son's empire of violence and blood. Sophie slammed the laptop shut, her heart hammering. She should burn the recipe book, forget she'd ever met Maria Santoro, stay far away from anything involving the word Mafia. But the oilcloth bundle sat on her counter, innocent and damning all at once, and Sophie had made a promise to a woman who'd taught her that legacy mattered, that keeping your word mattered, that some things were worth protecting, even when the world fell apart. Sophie looked around her failing bakery, at the burned cannoli shells still scattered across the floor, at the bills stacked on the desk in her office, at the life she was losing one day at a time. What did she have left to lose? She opened her laptop again, found the address listed in one of the articles. Santoro Import, Export, Red Hook, Brooklyn. A legitimate business that everyone knew was anything but. Sophie would go today, after the morning rush, if there even was one. She'd return the book, deliver Maria's message, and walk away clean. One promise kept, one small thing done right in a year of things gone wrong. It was a good plan. A simple plan. A plan that would have worked if Sophie had known one critical thing. Domenico Santoro had spent 15 years believing his mother had died in a car accident. Her body burned beyond recognition. He'd buried an empty casket. He'd mourned. He'd built an empire on the foundation of that grief. And he'd spent those 15 years becoming exactly what his mother had feared. A man who solved problems with violence, who inspired fear instead of love, who'd forgotten what it felt like to be anything other than dangerous. When Sophie walked into his world carrying proof that his mother had been alive, that she'd been hiding from him, that she'd loved him enough to leave, everything was about to change. Sophie managed to salvage the morning. She made a fresh batch of cannoli shells, filled them with the ricotta cream she'd prepared the night before. Mrs. Kowalski arrived at 7 a.m. Sharp, paid in exact change, and left happy. 3 other customers trickled in before noon. Mr. Chen bought his daily coffee and sfogliatelle. 2 teenagers bought cupcakes. A young mother bought cookies for her son's birthday party, then apologized because she could only afford a half dozen instead of a full dozen. "Take 8, Sophie said, adding 2 extra to the box. "Happy birthday to your son." The woman's eyes had filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." It was a lie, of course. Sophie couldn't afford to give away anything, but some instincts ran deeper than business sense. Her grandmother had taught her that too. Feeding people mattered more than profit. By 1 p.m., the morning rush had ended. Sophie locked up, changed out of her flour-dusted clothes into clean jeans and a simple blue sweater. She wrapped Maria's recipe book in its oilcloth, placed it carefully in her backpack, and caught the Q train toward Red Hook. The neighborhood changed as the train approached the waterfront. Gentrified brownstones gave way to warehouses and industrial buildings. The air smelled like salt water and diesel fuel. This was old Brooklyn, the kind of place where tourists didn't venture and locals knew to keep their heads down. Santoro Import, Export occupied an entire warehouse block near the docks. The building was brick, 3 stories, with small windows and security cameras visible at every corner. A black Mercedes sat in the loading zone, gleaming in the afternoon sun. 2 men in suits stood near the entrance, their jackets cut to hide the bulge of shoulder holsters. Sophie's steps slowed as she approached. This was a mistake, a massive, potentially fatal mistake. But the recipe book sat heavy in her backpack, and Maria's voice echoed in her memory. "Tell him I loved him enough to leave." Sophie walked up to the entrance. The 2 men stepped forward, blocking her path. One was tall and broad, built like a wall. The other was shorter, wiry, with eyes that tracked her every movement. "Can we help you?" the shorter one asked. His tone said he already knew the answer was no. "I need to speak with Nico Santoro." Sophie was proud that her voice didn't shake. "Mr. Santoro doesn't take walk-ins. I have something that belongs to him, something of his mother's." The change in the men was instantaneous. The tall one's hand moved toward his jacket. The shorter one stepped closer, his casual demeanor evaporating. "Mr. Santoro's mother is dead," the tall one said, his voice hard. "Has been for 15 years. So whatever scam you're running, it's not a scam." Sophie pulled off her backpack, slowly, keeping her hands visible. "His mother gave me something before she disappeared. I promised I'd return it if he ever came looking. He never did, so I'm bringing it to him." "What did she give you?" the shorter one demanded. Sophie unzipped her backpack, pulled out the oilcloth bundle. Her recipe book. The 2 men exchanged glances. Some wordless communication passed between them. The shorter one pulled out his phone, stepped away, spoke quietly into it. Sophie waited, her heart pounding. Around her, the waterfront continued its afternoon rhythm. Trucks rumbled past. Seagulls screamed overhead. The East River lapped against the docks. The shorter man returned. "Mr. Caruso will see you." "I need to see Nico Santoro," Sophie insisted. "Mr. Caruso first. He handles security concerns." That didn't sound promising, but Sophie had come this far. She followed the men into the warehouse. Inside, the space was divided into offices and storage areas. Legitimate import-export operations occupied the front, but Sophie caught glimpses through open doors of things that looked decidedly less legitimate. Men counting cash, ledgers that were definitely not for customs officials, conversations that stopped abruptly when she passed. They led her to an office on the 2nd floor. The door was solid oak, expensive, with a brass nameplate that read, "Vincent Caruso, Operations Manager." The shorter guard knocked twice, waited, then opened the door. The office inside was surprisingly refined. Dark wood furniture, leather chairs, a massive desk that looked like it weighed more than Sophie's entire apartment. Behind the desk sat a man in his 50s, silver hair immaculately styled, suit probably worth more than 3 months of Sophie's rent. "Miss Chen," Vincent Caruso said, standing. His voice was smooth, educated, the kind of voice that could order your death and still sound polite. "Please, sit." Sophie sat, clutching the oilcloth bundle in her lap. Caruso dismissed the guards with a subtle gesture. They left, closing the door behind them. Tommy says you claim to have something of Mrs. Santoro's, Caruso said, settling back into his chair. Maria Santoro. A woman who died in a car accident 15 years ago. She didn't die, Sophie said quietly. Not 15 years ago, anyway. She worked at my grandmother's bakery. For 3 months, the summer I turned 13. Then she disappeared. Caruso's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. That's an interesting story. It's the truth. She left this. Sophie unwrapped the oilcloth, placed the leather-bound recipe book on Caruso's desk. She said if her son ever came looking, I should give it to him. She said to tell him she was sorry. She said to tell him the biscotti recipe on page 47 was his father's favorite. Sophie watched Caruso's face carefully. She said to tell him she loved him enough to leave. For a long moment, Caruso didn't move. He stared at the recipe book like it was a bomb that might explode. Then, slowly, he reached forward and opened it. His hands were steady, but Sophie saw his throat work as he swallowed. He turned pages carefully, reading the handwritten notes. When he reached page 47, he stopped. Jesus Christ, he whispered. This is real. This is Maria's handwriting. I've kept it safe for 15 years, Sophie said. I made a promise. Caruso looked up at her, and Sophie saw something she hadn't expected in his eyes. Grief. Raw, unprocessed grief that had been locked away for 15 years. You kept this secret for 15 years, he said slowly. Never told anyone. Never tried to sell this information to the press, or to Nico's enemies, or to the feds who would pay handsomely for proof that Maria Santoro faked her death. I made a promise to her, Sophie repeated, to a woman who taught me that keeping your word matters, that legacy matters. I don't break promises. Caruso closed the recipe book carefully, stood, and walked to the window overlooking the warehouse floor. Do you know what you've done, Miss Chen? Returned something that wasn't mine to keep. You've destroyed a man's entire understanding of his life. Caruso's voice was quiet. Nico buried his mother, mourned her, built everything he is on the foundation of that loss. And you're about to tell him it was all a lie, that she was alive, that she chose to leave him. Sophie's chest tightened. She hadn't thought about it that way. She'd been so focused on keeping her promise that she hadn't considered what that promise would cost. Should I not have come? She asked quietly. You should have come 15 years ago. Or never at all. Caruso turned back to face her. But you're here now, and this can't be undone. Wait here. He picked up the recipe book, walked out, and left Sophie alone in the expensive office, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Domenico Nico Santoro was in the middle of a meeting about shipping manifests when Vincent Caruso opened the door to his private office without knocking. Nico looked up, ready to snap at the interruption, but the expression on Vincent's face stopped him cold. Vincent had been his father's consigliere, his most trusted advisor. In 30 years, Nico had never seen him look shaken. We need to talk, Vincent said quietly. Alone, now. Nico gestured to the 3 men sitting across from him. We're done. Come back tomorrow. They left quickly, recognizing the tension in the room. When the door closed, Nico leaned back in his chair. What happened? Vincent placed something on Nico's desk. An oilcloth bundle, carefully wrapped. There's a woman downstairs. Sophie Chen. She says your mother worked at her grandmother's bakery 15 years ago. For 3 months, the summer Sophie was 13. Then Maria disappeared. Nico's jaw tightened. My mother died in a car accident 15 years ago. Did she? Vincent unwrapped the bundle, revealing a leather-bound book. Or did she disappear? Nico stared at the book. His hands had gone numb. He recognized that leather binding. His mother had kept a recipe book, always. She'd written in it constantly, notes and recipes and memories. She'd guarded it like other people guarded gold. That book had supposedly burned in the car accident. Nothing left but ashes. But here it was, on his desk, real and impossible. Open it, Vincent said softly. Nico's hands shook as he opened the cover. His mother's handwriting filled the first page, her elegant script, unchanged from his memories. These recipes are not just food. They are history. They are love. They are every moment that mattered, preserved in flour and sugar. Maria Santoro. Nico turned pages, barely breathing. Every recipe annotated with notes that only his mother could have written. Memories he'd forgotten. Moments from his childhood. preserved in the margins like pressed flowers. He found the biscotti recipe on page 47. Read the note about him eating an entire batch at age 6. He'd forgotten that, completely forgotten. But now the memory came rushing back. The kitchen in their old apartment, his mother laughing as he reached for another cookie even though his stomach hurt. His father walking in, scooping him up, kissing his mother's flour-dusted cheek. Before everything had gone dark, before his father had been killed, before Nico had become this. She was alive, Nico whispered. She faked her death. She left me. The woman who brought this, Vincent said carefully. She's just a baker. Sophie Chen, 28, owns a struggling bakery in Sunset Park. She says Maria made her promise to keep the book safe, to return it if you came looking. I never came looking because I thought she was dead. Nico's voice cracked. I buried her. I mourned her. And she was alive the whole time? I don't think she still is, Vincent said gently. Sophie said Maria worked there 15 years ago. Past tense. She probably didn't survive whatever she ran from. Nico closed the recipe book, pressed his palms flat against the leather. His chest felt like something was breaking inside it, cracking open after 15 years of being locked down tight. His mother had loved him. The book was proof of that. Every recipe, every note, every carefully preserved memory said she'd loved him. But she'd loved him enough to leave, to let him believe she was dead rather than stay in his world. Where's Sophie Chen? Nico asked, his voice deadly calm. My office, waiting. She kept this secret for 15 years. Never told anyone. Never tried to profit from it. She said she made a promise. Nico stood, straightened his jacket. The shock was fading, replaced by something colder. Something more familiar. Let's meet the woman who's been guarding my mother's ghost. Vincent led him down the hall. Outside his office door, the two guards straightened. She's unarmed, boss, Tommy said. Clean. Just here to return the book. Nico opened the door. Sophie Chen sat in the leather chair across from Vincent's desk, her backpack at her feet, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up when he entered, and Nico saw her eyes widen slightly. Fear. Good. She should be afraid. But then something else flickered across her face. Recognition. And impossibly, sadness. You have her eyes, Sophie said quietly. Maria's eyes. I should have realized. Nico moved around the desk, forcing himself to stay calm, to not grab her by the throat and demand why. Why she'd kept this secret. Why she'd waited. Why she'd come now. Tell me everything, he said instead. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out. So Sophie told him, and with every word, Nico's carefully constructed world cracked a little wider, letting in light that burned like acid and felt like something he'd lost long ago, something that might have been hope. Sophie told him everything. About the summer Maria had appeared at her grandmother's bakery, elegant and sad, teaching a 13-year-old girl how to make sfogliatelle that shattered like glass. About the recipes that were really love letters. About Maria's confession, that her son thought she was dead, and maybe that was better than the truth. About the morning Maria disappeared, leaving only the recipe book and a note asking Sophie to keep it safe. She never said where she was going? Nico asked. His voice was controlled, but Sophie could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the edge of Vincent's desk. No, my grandmother tried to find her. We had no address, no phone number, just Maria Santoro, and that's not exactly an uncommon name in Brooklyn. Did she say why she left? Sophie hesitated. This was the part that would hurt. She said your world was too dark, too violent. She said she couldn't watch you become what your father was. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Vincent shifted slightly, his hand moving closer to his jacket. The guards outside tensed, visible through the glass door, but Nico just nodded slowly. She was right. I did become exactly what my father was. Maybe worse. The admission hung in the road, air between them. Sophie didn't know what to say to that. What did you say to a man who'd just confirmed he was everything his mother had feared? Why now? Nico asked suddenly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Why come here today, after 15 years? Because I made a promise, Sophie said simply. And because... She trailed off, unsure how much to reveal. Because... Nico's voice was soft, dangerous. Because my bakery is failing. Because I'm losing everything my grandmother built, and I thought maybe if I could keep this one promise, it would mean something, that I'd done one thing right. It was too honest, too raw. Sophie immediately regretted the words, but they were already out there, hanging in the expensive air of Vincent's office. Nico studied her for a long moment. You're telling me you walked into a Mafia organization's headquarters, carrying evidence that could destroy me, because you wanted to feel like you'd kept your word? Yes. That's either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both, Sophie admitted. Something flickered in Nico's eyes. It might have been amusement, or respect, or calculation. Sophie couldn't tell. Vincent, Nico said, not taking his eyes off Sophie. Arrange a car to take Miss Chen home. Boss, Vincent started. Now. Sophie stood, grabbing her backpack. Thank you for seeing me. I'm sorry if the book caused pain. That wasn't my intention. Miss Chen, Nico said as she reached the door. She turned back. This recipe book. My mother wrote in it constantly. Notes about every important moment in my childhood. But there's nothing after I turned 15. Nothing about the years before her supposed death. Sophie's throat tightened. Maybe those years weren't worth remembering. Or maybe she stopped writing because there was nothing good left to preserve. Nico's voice was quiet, almost gentle. Thank you for keeping your promise. For protecting this. Sophie nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and let Vincent guide her out. The black Mercedes that drove Sophie home was more luxury than she'd experienced in her entire life. Leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A driver who didn't speak but watched her through the rearview mirror like she might explode. Sophie stared out the window as Red Hook gave way to Sunset Park, as warehouses became brownstones, as Nico Santoro's world faded behind her. She'd kept her promise. Returned the book. She should feel relieved. Instead, she felt hollow. Like she'd given away the last piece of Maria, the last connection to that perfect summer, when she'd learned that food could be love made tangible. The car pulled up outside her bakery. The driver got out, opened her door. Mr. Santoro says to tell you he appreciates your discretion, the driver said. His voice was surprisingly kind. He asks that you don't speak to anyone about this. For your own safety. I won't, Sophie promised. She'd kept the secret for 2 years. She could keep it forever. The Mercedes drove away, and Sophie unlocked her bakery, stepping into the familiar smell of flour and vanilla. Home, for however much longer she could afford to keep it. Her phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from her landlord. A text from her equipment supplier. Payment overdue. Will repossess ovens if not received by end of week. Sophie sank onto the floor behind the counter, pulled her knees to her chest, and finally let herself cry. For Maria. For the promise kept and the connection lost. For the bakery she couldn't save. For being 28 and so tired of failing. She didn't hear the door chime. Didn't realize someone had entered until a shadow fell across her. Sophie looked up, gasping, scrambling backward. A man stood over her. Not one of Nico's well-dressed guards. This man was different. Scarred face, dead eyes. A smile that made Sophie's skin crawl. Sophie Chen, he said, his voice like gravel scraping glass. We need to talk about the book you just delivered to Nico Santoro. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Sophie's mind raced. How did this man know about the book? She'd been careful. She'd told no one. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The man laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. We've been watching the Santoro warehouse for months. Cameras everywhere. We saw you go in. Saw you come out. Saw Nico Santoro himself walk you to the car. He crouched down, getting eye level with Sophie. His breath smelled like cigarettes and something rotten. Nico doesn't personally see anyone. Doesn't walk anyone anywhere. So whatever you brought him, whatever you told him, it was important. And I want to know what it was. It was personal. Family business. Nothing to do with... Family business is exactly what we care about. The man grabbed Sophie's arm, yanking her to her feet. His grip was iron, bruising. Nico's been untouchable for years. But family? Family's weakness. Family's leverage. Sophie tried to pull away. Let go of me. Tell me what you gave him, or I'll... The door chimed again. The man's head snapped toward the entrance. His hand moved inside his jacket, reaching for something. A gun, Sophie realized with cold terror. But the figure in the doorway was faster. Tommy, the shorter guard from the warehouse, moved like liquid violence. 1 second he was by the door. The next, he had the scarred man's wrist twisted at an impossible angle, the gun clattering to the floor. "Big mistake, Russo," Tommy said calmly, forcing the man to his knees. "Touching what doesn't belong to you." A second guard entered, the tall one. He picked up the fallen gun, checked the chamber, pocketed it with casual efficiency. The scarred man, Russo, snarled. "This isn't over. Castellano wants to decide." "No, Castellano can ask Mr. Santoro himself," Tommy interrupted. Instead of sending a rat to threaten civilians, he looked at Sophie. "You hurt?" Sophie shook her head, though her arm throbbed where Russo had grabbed her. "I'm fine. How did you—" "Mr. Santoro said to watch you. Make sure you got home safe." Tommy's voice held a hint of apology. "Good thing we did." The tall guard was already on his phone. "Boss, we got a situation. Castellano's people followed Miss Chen." "Yeah, he's alive. Barely. What do you want us to do with him?" A pause. The guard's eyebrows rose. "You sure, boss?" Yeah, understood." He hung up, looked at Sophie. "Mr. Santoro's on his way. He wants you to stay put. Don't open the door for anyone except us." "Wait, what? Why is he coming here?" But the guards were already dragging Russo toward the back exit. The scarred man was cursing, threatening, promising revenge. Sophie heard the sound of a fist connecting with flesh, and then silence. She was alone in her bakery, surrounded by the comfortable smell of yesterday's bread and today's fear. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the counter, trying to steady herself. This was a nightmare. A surreal, terrifying nightmare. She'd returned a recipe book, a simple act of keeping a promise, and now men with guns were threatening her, dragging people out of her bakery, and Nico Santoro himself was coming here. Sophie's grandmother had always said kindness was its own reward, but she'd never mentioned that kindness could also be a death sentence. 15 minutes later, the black Mercedes pulled up outside. Nico emerged, flanked by Vincent and 2 more guards. He moved with predatory grace, his expensive suit somehow making him look more dangerous rather than less. Sophie unlocked the door before he could knock. "You don't have to. Inside," Nico said quietly. "Not a request." Sophie stepped back. Nico entered, his eyes sweeping the bakery with professional assessment. Vincent and the guards took positions by the windows and door, watching the street. "Tell me exactly what happened," Nico said. So Sophie did. The man named Russo. The threats. The cameras watching the warehouse. The mention of someone called Castellano. Nico's jaw tightened with each word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Marco Castellano," he finally said, "runs operations in Bay Ridge. We've had territorial disagreements. He thinks the book is leverage against you," Sophie said. "He's not wrong." Nico looked at her directly. "You walked into my world carrying proof that my mother faked her death, that I spent 15 years mourning a woman who chose to leave me. In my world, Miss Chen, that kind of information is currency, and Castellano just realized you're the bank." Sophie's stomach dropped. "I won't tell anyone. I'll sign whatever you want. Non-disclosure agreements, whatever makes this go away." "It's too late for that. Castellano knows you, exist, knows you have information about my family. He'll come for you again, and next time, my men might not be here. So what do I do?" Nico glanced at Vincent. Some wordless communication passed between them. Vincent nodded slightly, his expression unreadable. "You come with me," Nico said. "Tonight. We move you to a safe location until I can deal with Castellano. I can't just leave. I have a bakery. Customers. Mrs. Kowalski comes every Saturday for her cannoli. And Mrs. Kowalski will have to survive without her cannoli." Nico's voice was firm. "Because if you stay here, Sophie Chen, you won't survive the week." The use of her first name caught her off guard. It sounded strange in his mouth. Too intimate for a man she'd met hours ago. Too gentle for someone whose eyes held so much darkness. "I kept your mother's secret for 15 years," Sophie said quietly. "I protected her legacy. And now you're telling me that's going to get me killed?" "Yes," Nico said simply. "Welcome to my world, where kindness is a liability and promises can be fatal." He softened slightly. a barely perceptible shift in his expression. "I know this isn't fair. I know you did nothing wrong. But fair doesn't matter in this life. Only survival matters. And right now, your survival depends on disappearing until I can make Castellano understand that touching you means war." Sophie looked around her bakery, at the worn counter where her grandmother had stood for 40 years, at the ovens that were about to be repossessed anyway, at the life she'd been losing piece by piece. Maybe disappearing wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Maybe the worst thing had already happened, the day she'd decided to keep a promise to a ghost. "How long?" she asked. "A week. Maybe 2. Vincent will arrange for someone to check on the bakery. We'll handle your immediate bills. I don't want your money. You're in this situation because of my mother," Nico said flatly. "Because you kept a promise to her. The least I can do is make sure you don't lose everything while cleaning up the mess that promise created." It was practical, cold, but also, Sophie realized, surprisingly fair. He was taking responsibility for the consequences of his world touching hers. "Okay," Sophie said, "but I need to prepare some things. Lock up properly. My grandmother's recipes are upstairs in my apartment, and 10 minutes, Nico said. "Pack light. We leave in 10 minutes. Sophie nodded and headed for the stairs to her tiny apartment above the bakery. Behind her, she heard Vincent say quietly, "You sure about this, boss? Bringing her into the house?" "It's been 15 years since—" "I know how long it's been," Nico interrupted. "She protected my mother's memory. Now I'll protect her. That's how this works." Sophie paused on the stairs, hidden from view. There was something in Nico's voice, something beyond practicality and debt, something that sounded almost like connection, like he recognized her, not as a stranger, but as someone who understood what it meant to protect legacies, to keep promises, to choose honor over survival. Sophie continued up the stairs, her mind spinning. She was packing a bag to stay with a Mafia boss, because she'd returned a recipe book, because a woman named Maria had taught her 15 years ago that some promises were sacred. Her grandmother would have been horrified. Or maybe, Sophie thought as she grabbed her few possessions, maybe her grandmother would have understood perfectly. After all, her grandmother had kept Maria's secret too, had protected that recipe book like it was gold, had taught Sophie that the right thing was often the hard thing, and that honor mattered more than ease. Sophie packed quickly. Clothes, her own recipe notebook, her grandmother's photo, her phone charger, everything that mattered fit in one small duffel bag. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the accumulation of 28 years could stay behind. When she came back downstairs, Nico was standing by the front window, his silhouette dark against the fading afternoon light. He turned as she approached. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." Nico's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Fair warning, Miss Chen. My house is not what you'd expect. I'm not sure what I expect anymore." "Good," Nico said. "Expectations are dangerous. They make you predictable. And in my world, predictable gets you killed." He held the door open for her, a surprisingly courteous gesture from a man who'd just upended her entire life. Sophie stepped out into the cool Brooklyn evening, into the waiting Mercedes, into a world she didn't understand and couldn't escape. Behind her, her bakery stood dark and empty. A promise kept, a life paused, a future uncertain. But as the car pulled away, Sophie found herself thinking about Maria's words from 15 years ago. Some loves mean letting go, even when it destroys you. Maria had let go of her son to save him, from watching her suffer in his world. And now Sophie was being pulled into that same world, not by choice but by consequence. The irony wasn't lost on her, neither was the fear. But underneath both, something else stirred. Curiosity, about the man sitting across from her, whose mother had loved him enough to leave. About the darkness Maria had run from. About what kind of person emerged from that darkness still capable of protecting someone who'd done nothing but tell the truth. The Mercedes merged into traffic, carrying Sophie toward an unknown future in a world made of shadows and debts, violence and unexpected grace. Behind them, the sun set over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Nico's house wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as a Victorian mansion in Brooklyn Heights. 3 stories of elegant brick and stone, surrounded by walls that looked decorative but Sophie suspected, were reinforced steel, security cameras visible at every corner, guards at the gate who checked the car 3 times before letting them through. The interior was equally intimidating: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, art that probably cost more than Sophie's entire bakery. Everything was beautiful and cold, like a museum where people happen to live. "Vincent will show you to your room," Nico said as they entered the foyer. "Stay on the second floor. Don't go to the third floor or the basement. Don't answer the door. Don't leave the house without Tommy or Marco accompanying you." "Sounds like prison with better furniture," Sophie said before she could stop herself. Vincent winced. The guards shifted uncomfortably. But Nico just looked at her. And again, that almost smile flickered across his face. "It's protection, Miss Chen. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because I'm being told where I can go, what I can do, who I can talk to. That sounds like prison to me. In prison, people want to keep you in. Here, I'm trying to keep danger out." Nico's voice was patient, like he was explaining something to a child. "Big difference." Sophie wanted to argue, but exhaustion was crashing over her like a wave. The adrenaline from Russo's attack had faded, leaving her shaky and spent. "I'd like to see my room," she said quietly. Vincent led her upstairs. The second floor was warmer than the rest of the house. Hardwood floors instead of marble. Family photos on the walls, though Sophie noticed they all seemed to be at least 15 years old. A younger Nico, maybe 19 or 20, standing with an older man who had to be his father. Same sharp cheekbones, same intense eyes. "Here," Vincent said, opening a door at the end of the hall. "Bathrooms attached. There's clothes in the closet, various sizes. Kitchen's on the first floor. Help yourself to anything." The room was larger than Sophie's entire apartment. A queen bed with white linens, a window overlooking the garden, a bookshelf filled with novels in Italian and English. It was comfortable, almost cozy, in a way that made Sophie's chest tighten. This was Maria's room. She was sure of it. "This was her room, wasn't it?" Sophie asked. "Maria's." Vincent hesitated. "How did you know?" "The books. I remember she loved reading, and the view. She talked about missing her garden." Vincent nodded slowly. "Nico kept it exactly as she left it. Hasn't changed a thing in 15 years. He comes in here sometimes, late at night, just sits by the window." The image of Nico Santoro, the dangerous Mafia boss, sitting alone in his dead mother's room, broke something in Sophie's chest. "He must have loved her very much," she said softly. "He did. Still does. That's why." Vincent trailed off, seemed to reconsider his words. "Get some rest. I'll have dinner sent up. I can come downstairs." "Not tonight. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out the logistics." Vincent left, closing the door quietly behind him. Sophie was alone in Maria Santoro's room, surrounded by the ghost of a woman who'd taught her that recipes were love letters and promises mattered. Sophie sat on the bed, pulled out her phone. No service. They'd probably blocked it. She should feel trapped, scared, angry. Instead, she felt strange peace. For the first time in months, she wasn't worrying about rent or bills or keeping the lights on. Her problems hadn't disappeared, but they'd been temporarily suspended, frozen in place while she existed in this bubble outside normal life. A knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called. A woman entered, maybe 60, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. She carried a tray laden with food. "Hello, dear. I'm Rosa. I manage the house. Mr. Santoro said you'd be staying with us." "Sophie," she introduced herself. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Rosa set the tray on the desk by the window. "Honey, this house has been dead for 15 years. You're the first bit of life we've had. Eat. You look half-starved." The food was incredible. Pasta with a sauce that tasted like summers in Italy, even though Sophie had never been. Fresh bread, still warm. A salad with tomatoes that actually tasted like tomatoes. And for dessert, a small serving of tiramisu that made Sophie want to cry. "This is amazing," Sophie said. "Did you make this?" "Me and Marco, the kitchen assistant. We do our best, but..." Rosa sighed. "This kitchen hasn't been the same since Mrs. Santoro. She was the heart of this house. Made everything better just by being here. She taught me how to cook," Sophie found herself saying. "When I was 13, just for a summer, but those 3 months changed everything." Rosa's eyes widened. "You knew her?" "You knew Maria. She worked at my grandmother's bakery. She never told me who she was, who her family was. She was just Maria, teaching me how to make sfogliatelle that shattered like glass. That woman could make food that tasted like love felt, Rosa said softly. Nico would come home from wherever boys go, all angry and closed off, and she'd put a plate in front of him. 5 minutes later, he'd be telling her everything. Food was her magic. She left me her recipe book, Sophie said. That's why I'm here. I came to return it to Nico. Rosa sat heavily in the chair by the window. So that's what you brought, I wondered. Vincent wouldn't say, but Nico's been different since you arrived. Unsettled. Like something inside him cracked open. I didn't mean to cause problems. Honey, some cracks need to happen. Some things need to break open before they can heal. Rosa stood, picked up the empty tray. Get some rest. Tomorrow's Sunday. Nico doesn't do business on Sundays. It's his mother's rule. He's kept it all these years. Even after she left, Sophie finished. Even after she left, Rosa agreed. Some traditions are sacred. Even in this world. She left Sophie alone with her thoughts and a full stomach. Outside the window, night had fallen over Brooklyn. Lights twinkled in the distance. Life continued, normal and mundane, while Sophie sat in a dead woman's room, protected by her son, caught in the consequences of a promise made 15 years ago. Sophie changed into the pajamas she found in the dresser, soft cotton that smelled like lavender, and climbed into bed. The sheets were expensive, smooth, nothing like her cheap apartment linens. Everything about this place was too much, too beautiful, too comfortable, too dangerous. She was drifting off when she heard it, footsteps in the hall. They paused outside her door. For a long moment, nothing. Then they continued, moving away. Nico, Sophie realized, checking on her. Or maybe visiting his mother's room one last time before a stranger occupied it. Sophie closed her eyes, pulled the covers up to her chin, and let exhaustion drag her under. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more questions, or danger. But tonight, in Maria's room, surrounded by the books she'd loved and the life she'd left behind, Sophie felt strangely safe, as if Maria's ghost was still here, still protecting the people she'd loved, still teaching that some promises were worth keeping even when they cost everything. Sophie woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then reality crashed back. Mafia boss. Safe house. Castellano's threats. She checked her phone. Still no service. But the date showed Sunday. September 17th. She'd slept almost 12 hours. Sophie dressed in clothes from the closet, jeans that fit surprisingly well and a soft sweater, and ventured downstairs. The house was quieter than she'd expected. No guards visible in the hallways. No tense conversations behind closed doors. She followed the coffee smell to an enormous kitchen at the back of the house, and stopped in the doorway, stunned. Nico Santoro stood at the stove, wearing jeans and a simple black t-shirt, cooking, actually cooking. An omelet was taking shape in the pan. Toast sat waiting on a plate. The espresso machine hissed in the corner. He looked up as she entered. Good morning. You slept well? Yes, thank you. Sophie couldn't stop staring. This was not the intimidating mafia boss from yesterday. This was someone else. Someone almost normal. Sit, Nico said, gesturing to the kitchen island. Rosa doesn't work Sundays. Neither does anyone else. House rule. You gave your staff Sundays off? Sophie sat, still processing. My mother's rule. Sunday is for family, she used to say. For rest. For remembering what matters. Nico plated the omelet with surprising skill. Added the toast, poured coffee. She believed even criminals deserved one day of grace. He set the plate in front of Sophie. The omelet was perfect, fluffy, filled with cheese and herbs. The coffee was strong and rich. This man who ordered violence for a living had just made her breakfast. Thank you, Sophie said quietly. Nico made his own plate, sat across from her at the island. For a moment, they ate in comfortable silence. Outside the window, the garden was beautiful in the morning light. Roses in full bloom, a stone path winding through carefully tended beds. She planted that garden, Nico said, following Sophie's gaze. Spent hours out there, even when my father told her it was beneath the wife of a Santoro to dig in the dirt. She said growing things kept her sane in a world of destruction. She talked about her garden, Sophie said. At the bakery. She said she missed being able to create life instead of being surrounded by death. Nico's jaw tightened. She said that to you? A 13-year-old girl? She didn't know I understood. But I did. My father. Sophie hesitated. My father was violent, angry. My mother left him when I was 8, moved in with my grandmother. My grandmother's bakery became my safe place, where things made sense, where creation mattered more than destruction. She looked at Nico. Maria recognized that in me. That's why she taught me. She saw someone who needed to learn that beauty could exist, even when your world was dark. Nico was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than Sophie had heard it. She was good at that, seeing people's pain, trying to heal it with food and kindness. It worked, Sophie said. Those 3 months with her changed my life. I became a baker because of her, built my whole life around what she taught me, and now that life is on hold because you tried to honor her memory. It was already failing, Sophie admitted. The bakery. I've been losing money for months. Can't compete with the chains. Can't afford the rent increases. I was probably going to close anyway. Why didn't you? Nico asked. If you were failing, why keep fighting? Because it's my grandmother's legacy. Because Maria taught me there 15 years ago. Because Sophie's throat tightened. Because I didn't want to admit I'd failed them both. Failed to protect what they'd built. Nico stood, refilled his coffee, stared out the window at his mother's garden. I understand that. Failing the people we love. Becoming something they'd be ashamed of. Building empires on the foundation of their disappointment. Your mother wouldn't be disappointed, Sophie said quietly. She'd be sad, maybe, but not disappointed. She knew who you were, what you were becoming, and she left because she loved you too much to watch it destroy her. Or she left because I'd already destroyed the person she wanted me to be. Nico turned back, his eyes hard. Don't romanticize my mother's choice, Sophie. She didn't leave to protect me. She left to protect herself from me. The words hung in the air, brutal and honest. Sophie wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because maybe Nico was right. Maybe Maria had run not from the Mafia world, but from seeing her son consumed by it. The recipe book, Sophie said. Did you read all of it? Every word, 3 times. Then you know she never stopped loving you. Every page is about you. Every recipe connected to a memory of you. She carried you with her, even when she ran. Love that makes you leave isn't love, Sophie. It's surrender. No, Sophie said firmly. Love that makes you leave is the hardest kind. It's choosing what's best for someone else over what you need. Your mother stayed as long as she could. But watching you become your father, seeing you choose violence over everything else that was killing her, so she left. And that choice, that sacrifice, was the most loving thing she could do. Nico stared at her. Something shifted in his expression. Anger, maybe, or recognition, or both. You sound like her, he said finally. That's exactly the kind of thing she'd say. Find the grace in pain. Find the love in loss. She taught me that too, Sophie said. Along with the sfogliatelle. Nico's phone buzzed on. The counter. He checked it, his expression darkening. Vincent, there's been a development. The moment shattered. The normal man cooking breakfast disappeared, replaced by the Mafia boss who controlled half of Brooklyn. Nico was already heading toward his office, phone to his ear, his voice cold and commanding. Sophie sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of a Sunday morning that had briefly felt like peace. Outside, Maria's roses continued blooming, indifferent to the violence being planned in the house she'd once called home. Vincent arrived within 15 minutes, accompanied by Tommy and 2 other men Sophie recognized from the warehouse. They gathered in Nico's study, a room Sophie wasn't supposed to enter, but could hear perfectly from the hallway outside. She knew she shouldn't eavesdrop, knew it was dangerous. But this was her life they were discussing, her safety, and she deserved to know what was happening. Castellanos made his move, Vincent was saying. Hit 3 of our collection points last night. Small damage, but the message is clear. He's not backing down. How many men did he use? Nico's voice was ice. 12 that we've identified. Professional crews. He's serious about this. What's he want? Meeting. Tomorrow night. Neutral ground. He says he wants to discuss mutual concerns about information leaks. Vincent paused. It's about the girl, boss. He thinks she's leverage. She's not leverage. She's a civilian who got caught in our world through no fault of her own. Castellano doesn't care about fault. He cares about advantage. And right now, Sophie Chen is an advantage he wants to exploit. Sophie's blood ran cold. She'd brought this on herself, walked into Nico's world carrying proof of his mother's betrayal, and now she was being used as a weapon between rival families. Set up the meeting, Nico said finally. But not tomorrow. I need time to make sure Castellano understands the consequences of touching what's purpose. Mine. What's yours? Vincent's voice held a question. She kept my mother's legacy safe for 15 years. That makes her family, and we protect family. Sophie's breath caught. Family. She wasn't just a problem to be managed. She was something more, something that mattered. I'll make the arrangements, Vincent said. But boss, you should know Castellano's been asking around about her. About the bakery. He knows she's struggling financially. He's going to offer her a deal. What kind of deal? Money to save the bakery in exchange for information about your mother. About the recipe book. About whatever else she knows. She won't take it, Nico said with certainty. How do you know? Because she had 15 years to sell that information. Could have gone to the press. Could have gone to my enemies. Could have made herself rich. Instead, she kept a promise to a woman she barely knew. That's not someone who takes bribes. There was pride in Nico's voice. Respect. And something else Sophie couldn't quite identify. So what do? Vincent asked. We make sure Castellano understands that Sophie Chen is not a target, not leverage, not an opportunity. We make sure he understands that touching her means war. That's going to cost us. I don't care what it costs, Nico said flatly. My mother trusted her. So do I. Sophie backed away from the door before they could discover her listening. She returned to the kitchen, her mind spinning. War. Nico was willing to go to war to protect her. A stranger. A baker with no money and no power and nothing to offer except the truth about his mother. Why? Because his mother had trusted her? Because she'd kept a promise? Or because, and this thought made Sophie's chest tighten because he saw something in her that reminded him of what his mother had been. Before the violence, before the running, before everything fell apart. Sophie was washing the breakfast dishes, needing something to do with her hands, when Nico appeared in the doorway. You heard, he said. Not a question. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have listened, but you have a right to know what's happening. It's your life being discussed. Nico leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. Castellano wants to meet. Use you as leverage. That's not going to happen. Maybe I should just tell him everything. Answer his questions. Then he'll have no reason to. No. Nico's voice was firm. You don't negotiate with people like Castellano. You show strength or you show weakness. There's no middle ground. So what happens now? Now you stay here. Stay safe. Let me handle Castellano. By going to war? Sophie's voice rose. By putting your people in danger? Because I returned a recipe book? By protecting what's mine, Nico corrected. And you're mine now, Sophie Chen. Whether you want to be or not, you entered my world. That makes you my responsibility. I don't want to be anyone's responsibility. I don't want people dying because I tried to keep a promise. Nico crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, getting close enough that Sophie had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. My mother left me her most precious possession, her recipes, her memories, her love, preserved in food and ink. She gave them to you because she trusted you to protect them. And you did. For 15 years, you protected her legacy when I thought it was ashes in an urn. His voice softened slightly. That means something. In my world, loyalty means everything. Trust means everything. You proved both. So yes, Sophie, you're my responsibility now. And I don't fail my responsibilities. Sophie's heart was racing. Standing this close to Nico Santoro, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle. Could feel the heat radiating off him. The coiled violence barely contained beneath expensive clothes and controlled demeanor. He was dangerous, lethal, everything his mother had run from, but he was also someone who kept his mother's traditions, who gave his staff Sundays off, who made perfect omelets and tended his mother's garden and promised to protect strangers who'd done nothing but tell the truth. I don't know how to exist in your world, Sophie whispered. You don't have to. You just have to trust me to keep you safe in it. Nico stepped back, breaking the intensity of the moment. Vincent's arranging a security detail. You'll have guards with you at all times, even in the house. That sounds like prison again. That sounds like surviving until Castellano realizes you're not worth the cost of war. Sophie wanted to argue, but exhaustion was setting in again. The adrenaline of the past 24 hours was catching up with her. She was so tired of fighting, so tired of surviving on her own. Maybe, just for a little while, she could let someone else carry the weight. Okay, she said quietly. I'll trust you. Something flickered in Nico's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. Thank you. He left her alone in the kitchen, in his mother's house, surrounded by the ghosts of promises kept and families broken and a future that looked nothing like the life she'd planned. But for the first time in months, Sophie wasn't worrying about rent or bills or keeping the lights on. She was worrying about something entirely different. She was worrying about what it meant to be protected by a man like Nico Santoro, and what would happen when the protection inevitably turned into something more complicated than simple obligation. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over Brooklyn. The roses in Maria's garden swayed in the rising wind. A storm was coming. Sophie could feel it in her bones, and she wasn't sure if she'd survive it, or if survival would cost more than she could afford to pay. The storm broke on Monday afternoon. Sophie was in Maria's garden, attempting to deadhead roses under Marco's watchful eye, when Vincent came striding across the lawn. His expression was grim. Inside. Now. Sophie dropped the pruning shears, followed him into the house. In the study, Nico stood behind his desk, jaw clenched, staring at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. What happened? Sophie asked. Nico looked up. Castellano took your bakery. Sophie's world tilted. What? He had his men break in an hour ago. Claimed you owed him money. That he was collecting on a debt. By the time the police arrived, he had paperwork fake, but convincing enough showing he'd loaned you $50,000. That's insane. I know. Nico's voice was controlled fury. He's forcing my hand. He wants me at the meeting tonight, angry and off balance. He thinks I'll make mistakes. Sophie sank into a chair. Her bakery, her grandmother's legacy, the one thing she'd been trying desperately to save, now held hostage by a man she'd never even met. What does he really want? She asked quietly. Information about my mother. Proof she faked. Her death. He thinks if he can prove I've been living a lie, it'll damage my reputation, make me look weak, give him leverage to take my territory. Vincent spoke up from the doorway. The meeting set for 8 p.m. Neutral ground, the old shipping warehouse on Pier 42. Castellano's bringing 5 men. We can bring 5. He'll have more, Nico said flatly. Hidden, watching. This is a trap. So we don't go, Sophie said. We find another way. There is no other way. Nico looked at her directly. He has your bakery. He's going to destroy it piece by piece until I show up. That's how this works. Then let him destroy it. Sophie's voice was stronger than she felt. It's just a building. Just stuff. It's not worth anyone dying over. It's your grandmother's legacy. My grandmother is dead. So is your mother, and I'm tired of the dead controlling the living. Sophie stood, faced Nico across the desk. Maria left because she didn't want you dying for things that didn't matter. I won't let you do that now. Not for a bakery. Not for me. Nico came around the desk slowly. You think I'm doing this for the bakery? Aren't you? I'm doing this because Castellano thinks he can take what's mine. He thinks he can threaten you, intimidate you, use you against me. And if I let that stand, I'm weak. And weak men don't survive in my world. So this is about ego, about power. This is about keeping you alive, Nico said, his voice dropping. Because if I show weakness now, Castellano won't stop with the bakery. He'll come for you, and he won't be gentle about it. The truth of that settled over Sophie like ice water. This wasn't theoretical anymore. Castellano had already escalated, already proven he was willing to cross lines. Then I'm coming with you, Sophie said. Absolutely not. He wants information about your mother? Fine. I'll give it to him. I'll tell him everything. About the recipe book, about Maria working at the bakery, about her leaving you. I'll tell him it's not some grand conspiracy, it's just a sad woman who couldn't handle her son's choices. Sophie, he's using me as leverage because I'm hidden away, because I'm mysterious. So let's remove the mystery. Let's make me boring. Let's make me not worth the effort. Vincent was shaking his head. Boss, this is a bad idea. But Nico was looking at Sophie with something like respect. You understand what you're offering? Once Castellano hears your story, once he realizes there's no conspiracy, he might decide you're a loose end, someone who knows too much and matters too little. Then you'll have to convince him I matter, Sophie said simply. The study went silent. Vincent looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with whatever he was witnessing. Tommy, standing guard by the door, suddenly found the floor fascinating. Nico stepped closer. You matter, he said quietly. You already matter. That's the problem. Sophie's breath caught. The intensity in his eyes was overwhelming. This wasn't about obligation anymore. Wasn't about duty or honor or protecting his mother's memory. This was something else entirely. I'm coming, Sophie said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You can't stop me. I could lock you in your room. You could, but you won't, because that's not who you are. You're not your father, Nico. You're not the man your mother ran from. You're the man who makes omelets on Sunday mornings and keeps her garden alive and protects people who can't protect themselves. Nico's jaw worked. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, Vincent, prepare 2 cars. Sophie rides with me, Tommy and Marco in the second vehicle. Full security protocols. Boss. Vincent started. She's right. Castellano wants mystery and leverage. We'll give him truth and strength instead. Nico's eyes never left Sophie's. But you follow my lead. You speak when I tell you to speak. You stay behind me at all times. Understood? Understood. And if things go bad, you run. You don't look back. You don't try to help. You run. And you let my men protect you. Nico, promise me, Sophie. Promise me you'll run if I tell you to. The desperation in his voice surprised her. This wasn't the cold Mafia boss. This was someone terrified of failing someone he what? Cared about? After 2 days? But Sophie thought about Maria, who'd changed her life in 3 months. About connections that formed fast because they were real, because they touched something true beneath the surface. I promise, she said. Nico nodded once, sharp. 6 hours until the meeting. Rosa will find you something appropriate to wear. Black, preferably. Nothing flashy. Planning my outfit for my potential death. How thoughtful. If I let you die, my mother will find a way to come back from wherever she is and kill me herself. Nico's lips curved slightly. And I'm more afraid of her than I am of Castellano. It was the closest thing to a joke Sophie had heard from him. The tension in the room broke slightly. Vincent headed out to make arrangements. Tommy remained by the door, his expression unreadable. Sophie found herself alone with Nico in the study, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, dust motes dancing in the air. Why are you really letting me come? She asked quietly. Because you're right. You're the mystery he's chasing. Better to show him you're just a woman who kept a promise. Nothing more complicated than that. Is that all I am? A woman who kept a promise? Nico was quiet for a long moment. No, he finally said. You're the person my mother chose to trust with her last precious gift. You're the person who walked into a lion's den to honor a promise made 15 years ago. You're the person who'd rather lose everything than betray what matters. He stepped closer. In my world, Sophie, people like you don't exist. Everyone's for sale. Everyone has a price. Everyone betrays if the offer's good enough. But you can't be bought. Can't be threatened into betraying what you believe in. That's rare. That's stupid, Sophie said. That's how people get killed. Maybe, but it's also how people stay human in a world designed to strip humanity away. Nico's hand lifted, almost touching her face, then dropped. My mother saw that in you. So do I. The moment stretched between them, heavy with words unsaid and truths too dangerous to speak aloud. Then Nico stepped back, professional mask sliding into place. 6 hours. Be ready. He left Sophie standing in the study, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She'd just agreed to walk into a confrontation with a man who wanted to use her as leverage against one of Brooklyn's most dangerous criminals. She'd just agreed to potentially die for a bakery that was already failing and a promise made to a ghost. And the terrifying part? She didn't regret it. Rosa found Sophie in Maria's room, staring at the garden below. The housekeeper carried a garment bag and wore an expression of deep concern. Mr. Santoro told me, Rosa said, laying the bag on the bed. He told me what you're doing, and I think you're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Rosa opened the bag, revealing a simple black dress. elegant but not flashy, expensive but understated. This was Mrs. Santoro's. She wore it to difficult meetings. Said black armor was better than Kevlar for certain kinds of battles. Sophie touched the fabric. Silk, perfectly preserved. I can't wear her dress. You can, and you will. Because you're walking into that meeting as part of this family, whether you meant to be or not. And family wears armor. Rosa helped Sophie into the dress. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Sophie stared at her reflection in the mirror. She looked older, stronger, like someone who belonged in Nico Santoro's world instead of someone terrified by it. She'd be proud of you, Rosa said quietly. Maria. She'd be proud you kept her legacy safe. And she'd be proud you're trying to protect her son, even from himself. I'm not trying to protect him. I'm trying to prevent a war over something that doesn't matter. Doesn't it? Rosa met Sophie's eyes in the mirror. You matter to him, Sophie. More than you should after 2 days. More than is safe for either of you. I've worked for this family for 20 years. I've never seen Nico look at someone the way he looks at you. That's just because I remind him of his mother. No, honey. It's because you remind him of hope. And hope is the most dangerous thing a man like him can have. Rosa left Sophie with those words, and a pair of simple black heels that had also been Maria's. Sophie sat on the bed, ran her hands over the silk dress, and tried to ignore the voice in her head that sounded exactly like her grandmother. Sophie Chen, what have you gotten yourself into? The answer, of course, was something impossible to explain, something that started with a sty, recipe book and a promise, and had somehow transformed into this. Wearing a dead woman's dress, preparing to face down a crime boss, protected by another crime boss who looked at her like she was both salvation and destruction. Her grandmother would have told her to run, to get out while she still could, to let powerful men play their dangerous games without her. But Maria, Sophie thought, Maria would understand, would recognize the impossible choice between honor and safety, would know that sometimes the right thing was also the thing that might destroy you. Sophie stood, smoothed the dress, checked her reflection one last time. She looked like someone who belonged in Nico Santoro's world. The trick would be surviving long enough to leave it. The 2 black Mercedes left the Brooklyn Heights mansion at 7:30 p.m. Sophie rode with Nico in the first car, Vincent driving, Tommy in the passenger seat. The second car followed close behind, Marco and 3 other guards whose names Sophie hadn't learned. The drive to Red Hook took 20 minutes through evening traffic. No one spoke. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. Sophie watched Brooklyn slide past the tinted windows. Normal people living normal lives. Walking dogs, buying groceries, complaining about traffic. A world she'd been part of 3 days ago. Now she was heading to a confrontation that could end in violence. Wearing a dead woman's dress, protected by men with guns hidden under expensive suits. When we arrive, Nico said, breaking the silence. You stay in the car until I signal. Vincent checks the location first. Then we enter together. You're my, what's a word that won't make Castellano think I'm weak? Consultant? Sophie offered. On what? My mother's recipes. The book. You're consulting me on family history. Nico nodded slowly. That works. You're a consultant. Someone I hired to help understand my mother's legacy. Not personal. Not emotional. Purely business. Is that what I am? Sophie asked quietly. Purely business? Nico's dark eyes met hers. If I answer that honestly, I'll say something that makes this more complicated than it already is. Everything's already complicated. It could be more complicated. His hand moved, almost touching hers on the seat between them, then stopped. After tonight, after this is done, ask me again. The car pulled up to Pier 42. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, dark and menacing. Security lights created pools of harsh illumination. A black SUV was already parked near the entrance Castellano's vehicle. Vincent got out first, swept the area with professional efficiency, spoke quietly into his radio, received responses. Finally, he opened Nico's door. Looks clean, boss. Castellano's inside with 4 men visible. No sign of additional forces, but they're here somewhere. Nico emerged from the car, buttoned his suit jacket, transformed from the man who made breakfast into the Mafia boss who controlled Brooklyn. Sophie watched the shift with fascination and fear. This was who Maria had run from, this cold, lethal efficiency. But then Nico extended his hand to help Sophie from the car, and his grip was gentle, protective. The man beneath the monster, still there, still visible if you knew where to look. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "No, but let's do this anyway." They walked toward the warehouse entrance, flanked by guards. The night air smelled like the East River, salt and diesel and decay. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered. The space was mostly empty, cleared of cargo, with a single table set up in the center. Neutral ground. Meeting space. Marco Castellano stood behind the table, flanked by 4 men. He was shorter than Sophie expected, maybe 5'8", but built like a brick wall. Scars crossed his face, old wounds that had healed badly. His eyes were flat, emotionless, the eyes of someone who'd killed so many times it no longer registered. "Santoro," Castellano said, his voice like gravel. "You brought the girl. How trusting." "She's not the girl. She's a consultant, here to clear up your misconceptions about my family history." Nico's voice was ice. "And you have something of hers. A bakery you stole under false pretenses." "Stole? I collected on a debt." "There was no debt. We both know it." Castellano smiled. "It was not pleasant." "Prove it." "I don't need to prove anything. You know it's false. Just like you know threatening her was a mistake." "Was it?" Castellano's eyes slid to Sophie, assessing. "She doesn't look that valuable. Small, scared. What's she got that's worth going to war over?" Sophie felt Nico tense beside her. She stepped forward before he could respond, before the testosterone could escalate into violence. "I have information you think is valuable," Sophie said, keeping her voice steady. "About Maria Santoro. About her death, or lack thereof. You want to know if she faked it, if Nico's been lying, if there's weakness to exploit." Castellano's eyes narrowed. "You're smarter than you look. And you're exactly as predictable as you look. Yes, Maria Santoro faked her death 15 years ago. Yes, she left her son. And no, it's not the conspiracy you're hoping for." "Tell me." Sophie took a breath. "She worked at my grandmother's bakery for 3 months. Never told us who she really was. Just a woman who needed to escape a life she couldn't survive anymore. She taught me how to bake, left me her recipe book, and disappeared. That's it. No grand scheme, no hidden agenda, just a mother who couldn't watch her son become what his father was. You expect me to believe that? I don't care what you believe. It's the truth. Maria Santoro was a woman broken by violence. She ran. She probably died years ago, alone, away from the life that destroyed her. There's no leverage here, no conspiracy, just sadness." Sophie felt tears threatening but forced them back. "So you took my bakery for nothing, threatened me for nothing. Because the big secret you were chasing? It's just a sad story about a woman who loved her son too much to stay." The warehouse went silent. Castellano stared at her, processing. His men shifted uncomfortably. Even Nico's guard seemed affected by Sophie's raw honesty. "The recipe book," Castellano finally said. "Let me see it." "No," Nico said flatly. "Then how do I know she's telling the truth?" "Because I am," Sophie said. "Because I kept that book safe for 15 years without telling anyone. Without profiting from it. Without using it for leverage. Because some promises are sacred, even when they cost everything." She stepped closer to Castellano's side of the table, ignoring Nico's sharp intake of breath. "You want to know why I'm worth protecting? Not because I have valuable information, but because I represent something you've forgotten exists in your world. Honor, loyalty. The kind of person who keeps promises even when it's stupid, even when it costs them everything." Sophie's voice strengthened. "So yes, take my bakery, destroy it. I can't stop you. But you won't find leverage, you won't find weakness. You'll just find proof that Nico Santoro protects the people who prove they're worth protecting, and that makes him stronger than you, not weaker." Castellano's jaw clenched. For a heartbeat, Sophie thought she'd miscalculated, thought she'd pushed too hard, been too honest, and now there would be violence. Then Castellano laughed. It was genuine, surprised, almost respectful. "Jesus Christ, Santoro. Where'd you find her? She's got bigger balls than half your men." "I didn't find her. She found me." Nico moved closer to Sophie, protective. "Now return what you took. And if I don't? Then we go to war, and you lose, because I'm willing to burn half of Brooklyn to protect what's mine. Are you willing to do the same for a bakery and a conspiracy that doesn't exist?" The 2 men stared at each other, power dynamics shifting. calculations being made. In that moment, Sophie understood this was never really about her or the recipe book. This was about territory and respect and the endless chess game of criminal empires. She was just a piece on the board. An unusual piece, maybe, but still just a piece. The bakery's yours. Castellano finally said. Papers will be destroyed by morning. Consider it a gesture of respect. For what? For having the spine to bring her here. For finding someone in this cesspool who still believes in honor. Castellano looked at Sophie. You remind me of my grandmother. She had that same stupid loyalty. That same refusal to be bought. What happened to her? Sophie asked quietly. She died. Alone. Poor. Forgotten by everyone except me. Castellano's expression hardened. That's what loyalty gets you in this world, girl. Death and disappointment. Maybe, Sophie said. Or maybe it gets you people willing to go to war to protect you. People who remember your name. People who keep your legacy alive long after you're gone. She glanced at Nico. Maria Santoro has been dead for years, but I'm standing here, wearing her dress, protecting her memory, because she taught me that legacy matters more than survival. You can call that stupid, but I call it being human. Castellano nodded slowly. Get out of here before I change my mind and decide you're too dangerous to leave alive. Nico took Sophie's arm, guided her toward the exit. They were almost to the door when Castellano called out, Santoro. Nico turned. Your mother was right to run. This world destroys everything good it touches. Castellano's voice was tired. Don't let it destroy her too. Nico's hand tightened on Sophie's arm. I won't. They walked out into the night air, surrounded by guards, moving quickly toward the cars. Sophie's legs were shaking, adrenaline crash hitting hard. She'd just faced down a crime boss. She'd just gambled with her life. And somehow, impossibly, she'd won. They were 10 feet from the Mercedes when the first gunshot rang out. Everything happened in seconds that felt like hours. The bullet hit the car door next to Nico's head. He grabbed Sophie, threw her to the ground, his body covering hers. More gunshots. Return fire from Nico's guards. Shouting. The screech of tires. A black van had appeared from nowhere. Side door open. 3 men with automatic weapons firing at Nico's position. Not Castellano. Tommy shouted, returning fire. Different crew! Get her in the car, Nico yelled, dragging Sophie toward the Mercedes. But more vehicles were arriving, boxing them in. This wasn't random. This was a coordinated hit. Through the chaos, Sophie heard Castellano shouting from the warehouse entrance. Not my people, Santoro, this isn't me. But it didn't matter whose people they were. Bullets were flying. Men were screaming. And Sophie was in the middle of it all, wearing Maria's black dress, pressed against the cold metal of the car as Nico's body shielded hers. Vincent! Nico shouted. Get her out of here! Can't, boss. They've got both exits covered. The warehouse. Sophie's mind raced through panic. The warehouse would have back exits, service doors, ways out that weren't blocked. Inside, Sophie gasped. Back through the warehouse. There has to be another way out. Nico looked at her, then at the warehouse. Castellano was already retreating inside with his men. The enemy, whoever they were, was focusing on Nico's position. Go, Nico ordered his men. Cover us. Vincent, you're with me and Sophie. They ran. Low and fast, using the cars as cover. Bullets pinged off metal. Someone screamed. One of Nico's guards hit. But they kept moving, kept pushing toward the warehouse entrance. Inside, Castellano was barricading the main doors. Your enemies have interesting timing, Santoro. You set this up, Nico snarled, gun drawn. If I wanted you dead, I'd have shot you myself. Castellano gestured toward the back of the warehouse. Service exit, northeast corner. Leads to the loading docks. You can get out that way if you move fast. Why help me? Because whoever's shooting at you is also shooting at me. And I don't like uninvited guests. Castellano's men were taking positions at the windows, returning fire. Go. Before they breached the building, Nico grabbed Sophie's hand, pulled her toward the back. Vincent led the way, gun sweeping corners. Tommy brought up the rear, limping slightly, he'd been grazed. The service exit was locked. Vincent kicked it 3 times before it gave. They spilled out into a loading dock area, dark except for distant security lights. The East River was 50 yards away, boats moored at ancient pilings. Cars on the other side. Vincent panted. If we can get to the street. They'll have people watching. Nico interrupted. He was scanning the area, calculating odds. We need a different way out. The water, Sophie said. They all looked at her. There are boats. We take a bribant. Boat. Go south along the river. Land somewhere they're not watching. Can you drive a boat? Nico asked. My uncle had a boat. I spent summers on it. I can manage. Nico made a decision in seconds. Do it. Vincent, find us something fast. They ran toward the water. Behind them, the gunfire continued, a full battle now between Nico's remaining guards, Castellano's men, and whoever had launched the attack. Vincent located a speedboat tied to the dock, keys still in the ignition, either extremely lucky or a trap. Get in, Nico ordered. Sophie didn't argue. She climbed behind the wheel, hands shaking as she turned the key. The engine roared to life, beautiful and loud. Nico and Vincent jumped in. Tommy was running toward them when a bullet caught him in the back. He went down hard on the dock. Tommy! Sophie screamed. Nico started to move toward his fallen guard, but Vincent grabbed him. He's gone, boss. We have to go now. More gunmen were emerging from between warehouses, weapons raised. Nico looked at Tommy's body, at Sophie frozen in horror, at the impossible choice between honor and survival. Go, he told Sophie, his voice breaking. Drive. Now. Sophie slammed the throttle forward. The boat lurched away from the dock, bullets hitting the water around them. She kept her head down, kept the throttle open, steering by instinct and prayer. Behind them, Pier 42 became a war zone, lit by muzzle flashes and screams. And somewhere in that chaos, Tommy's body lay on the dock. One more casualty in a world that Sophie was only beginning to understand. She drove the boat south along the river, hands gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles went white. Nico and Vincent crouched low, watching for pursuit, but no boats followed. The attackers had what they wanted, chaos and casualties. After 10 minutes, Nico directed her toward a private dock in Bay Ridge. They climbed out, soaking wet from river spray, shaking with adrenaline crash. A car was already there, one of Nico's network, summoned by phone during the escape. The drive back to Brooklyn Heights was silent. Sophie couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop seeing Tommy fall, couldn't stop hearing the gunfire. She'd walked into Nico's world thinking she understood the stakes. But understanding theoretically and experiencing viscerally were different things. Tommy had died protecting them. Had died because Sophie had insisted on coming to the meeting. Had died because she'd kept a promise 15 years ago. When they reached the mansion, Sophie barely made it inside before her legs gave out. She collapsed in the foyer, Maria's black dress ruined with dirt and river water, her whole body shaking with delayed shock. Nico was there immediately, pulling her into his arms, holding her as she finally broke. I'm sorry, she sobbed into his chest. I'm so sorry, Tommy. He died because No. Nico's voice was firm. Tommy died doing his job, protecting his family. That's the life he chose. That's the life we all choose in this world. But if I hadn't insisted on coming, then Castellano wouldn't have returned the bakery, wouldn't have respected our position, and the attack would have happened anyway, just at a different time, different place. Nico pulled back, made her look at him. This isn't your fault, Sophie. This is what my world looks like. This is what my mother ran from. This is why she left. Sophie stared into his dark eyes, saw the pain there. The grief, the exhaustion of 15 years, carrying violence and responsibility and impossible choices. Who were they? She whispered. The attackers? I don't know yet, but I'll find out. And I'll make sure they regret targeting what's mine. I'm not yours, Nico. Aren't you? His hand came up, cupped her face. You walked into my world wearing my mother's dress. You faced down Castellano with more courage than trained soldiers. You drove that boat like you were born to escape danger. You're more mine than most of my actual blood family. Sophie's breath caught. They were too close, too raw, too real. This is the part where I should run, she whispered. Where I should leave your world and never look back. Like your mother did. Probably. Nico agreed. That would be the smart thing. But I don't want to be smart. I want. Sophie trailed off, unsure how to finish. Nico finished for her. You want to believe that keeping promises matters, that loyalty means something, that walking into danger for the right reasons is worth the cost. Yes. Then stay. Nico's thumb traced her cheekbone. gentle, despite the violence still thrumming through both of them. Stay and help me figure out who attacked us. Stay and help me honor Tommy's sacrifice. Stay and be the person my mother believed you were, someone who makes this dark world a little less dark. For how long? As long as you can. As long as you want to. As long as... He stopped himself. As long as what? Sophie pressed. Nico's control cracked. As long as I can pretend that having you here doesn't make me hope for things I gave up hoping for 15 years ago. He kissed her, desperate and gentle all at once. A kiss that tasted like river water and violence, and something that might have been salvation if either of them believed in such things anymore. Sophie kissed him back, poured 15 years of loneliness and loyalty and loss into that kiss. Let herself feel, just for a moment, what it might be like to be seen, to be valued, to matter to someone whose world was darkness but whose touch felt like coming home. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Nico rested his forehead against hers. "We can't do this," he said. "I know. You should leave, tomorrow. I'll make sure you're protected, make sure your bakery's safe, but you should go back to your life. I know, but I don't want you to leave. I know that too." They stood in the foyer, dripping river water onto marble floors, holding each other like anchors in a storm. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Police responding to the chaos at Pier 42. Vincent was somewhere in the house, making calls, managing the crisis, handling the aftermath of Tommy's death. And Sophie Chen, baker, keeper of promises, protector of ghosts, made a decision that would change everything. "I'm staying," she said. "Not forever, but until we figure out who attacked us. Until Tommy's death means something. Until? Nico prompted. "Until we figure out if this is real, or just trauma and proximity, and two broken people trying to find something good in darkness." Nico nodded slowly. "That could take a while. I have time. My bakery's closed anyway." Sophie managed a weak smile. "And someone needs to keep your mother's garden alive." Something shifted in Nico's expression. Relief, hope, fear. Okay. Rosa appeared with towels and hot tea, and the practical efficiency of someone who'd seen this kind of crisis before. She wrapped Sophie in blankets, guided her upstairs, ran a hot bath, all while muttering in Italian about men and violence and women who were too brave for their own good. Sophie sank into the bath, let the hot water wash away the river smell and the gun residue and the memory of Tommy falling. But she couldn't wash away the kiss, couldn't wash away the feeling of Nico's arms around her, protecting her, choosing her. She was in love with him, or falling toward it, or too traumatized to tell the difference. And tomorrow, when the adrenaline faded and reality set in, she'd probably regret everything. But tonight, soaking in Maria's bathtub in Maria's house protected by Maria's son, Sophie let herself believe that promises mattered, that loyalty had value, that walking into darkness for the right reasons could somehow lead to light. Even if that light was just the dawn breaking over Brooklyn, one more day survived in a world that tried its best to destroy everything good. The next 3 days were a blur of investigation and violence managed from a distance. Nico's network worked overtime, tracking down the attackers, identifying them as a crew from Philadelphia trying to make a name by taking out Brooklyn's most powerful families in one coordinated strike. It was ambitious. It was stupid. And it ended exactly how such things always ended, with bodies in shallow graves, and a message sent that some people were too dangerous to challenge. Sophie watched from the periphery, learning how Nico's world really worked. Not the Hollywood version with dramatic shootouts and clever schemes. The real version, methodical, brutal, efficient. Men disappeared. Problems were solved with violence wrapped in paperwork. Justice was delivered by people who'd never see the inside of a courtroom. It should have horrified her. Maybe it did. But it also fascinated her in a terrible way, because she saw how Nico moved through it all, never cruel for cruelty's sake, never violent, beyond necessity. He was lethal, yes, dangerous, absolutely, but also honorable in his own way. He kept his word, protected his people, honored debts, like his mother had taught him, before the world made him into something she couldn't recognize. On the 4th day, Nico found Sophie in the garden, tending Maria's roses. He sat on the stone bench, watched her work for a moment. "It's done," he said. "The Philadelphia crew won't bother us again." Castellano sent word he had nothing to do with the attack, actually helped contain them afterward. "We're not allies, but not enemies either." That's good, Sophie said, not looking up from the roses. Your bakery's been cleaned up. New locks. Security system. The false debt paperwork's been destroyed. You can reopen whenever you want. Okay, Sophie. Nico stood, moved closer. You've barely spoken to me in 3 days. Talk to me. Sophie set down the pruning shears, finally met his eyes. What do you want me to say? That I'm okay with how you solved this? That I understand the violence? That I'm fine with being in love with someone whose solution to problems is making people disappear? You're in love with me? Nico's voice was quiet. I'm something. I don't know what to call it. Trauma bonding? Stockholm syndrome? Or maybe actual love, which is the most terrifying option of all. She stood, faced him directly. Your mother ran from this world because she couldn't reconcile loving you with hating what you became. I'm standing here, 4 days in, already understanding why she left. Because caring about you means accepting that you solve problems with violence. Means accepting that people die in your orbit. Means accepting that this darkness is part of who you are. So leave, Nico said, his voice carefully neutral. I told you that you could leave whenever you wanted. I'll make sure you're protected. Make sure the bakery thrives. You can go back to your life. That's the problem. I don't want to leave. And that terrifies me more than the violence does. Nico closed the distance between them. My mother left because she couldn't change me. Couldn't save me from becoming my father. She was right to leave, Sophie. This world destroyed her. It'll destroy you too if you stay. Maybe, Sophie agreed. Or maybe I'm stronger than she was. Maybe I can stand in your darkness without being consumed by it. Maybe I can be the person who reminds you that you're not just the violence. You're also the man who makes breakfast on Sunday mornings, who keeps his mother's traditions, who protected a stranger because she kept a promise. That's not enough. It's enough for me, Sophie interrupted. It has to be enough, because I'm choosing to stay. I'm choosing you, Nico, not the Mafia boss, not the dangerous criminal. You, the person underneath all of that, the person your mother loved enough to leave. Nico's control finally broke. He pulled her into his arms, held her like she was the only real thing in his world of shadows. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you. No one deserves anything. We just get what we get and decide what to do with it. Sophie pulled back, looked up at him. Your mother made her choice. She left, and that was right for her, for that time. But I'm making a different choice. I'm staying. As long as you'll have me, as long as I can stand it, as long as... He kissed her, desperate and claiming and real. A kiss that tasted like promises neither of them was sure they could keep. When they broke apart, Nico said, I'll protect you. I'll keep you safe. But Sophie, you have to promise me something. What? If the darkness becomes too much, if my world starts destroying who you are, promise me you'll leave. Promise me you won't let loyalty turn into martyrdom. Like your mother did. Like my mother didn't. She left too late, stayed too long trying to save me. I won't let that happen to you. Sophie nodded. I promise. But Nico, you have to. Promise me something too. Anything. Promise me you'll try. Try to be more than just violence. Try to build something instead of just destroy. Try to be the person your mother believed you could be before the world made you into this. Nico was quiet for a long moment. Then, I don't know if I can. I don't know if there's enough of that person left. There is. I see him. Every time you tend this garden. Every time you keep your mother's traditions. Every time you choose protection over pure violence. He's there. The person you were before. The person you could still be. You make it sound possible. It is possible. If you want it to be. If you fight for it the way you fight for everything else in your life. Nico pulled her close again, buried his face in her hair. You're going to save me, aren't you? Or destroy me trying? Maybe both, Sophie said. Is that okay? I don't have a choice. I'm already too far gone to walk away. They stood in Maria's garden, holding each other. Two broken people trying to build something good from the wreckage of violence and loss. The roses bloomed around them, indifferent to the darkness these two carried, concerned only with their own survival, their own bloom, their own brief moment of beauty before winter came. And maybe, Sophie thought, that was all any of them could hope for. Brief moments of beauty, brief connections that felt real, brief chances to be more than our worst choices. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new violence, new impossible choices. But tonight, in this garden, with this man, Sophie Chen allowed herself to believe that promises mattered, that loyalty had value, that love or something close to it could bloom even in the darkest soil. Maria's ghost, if it existed, probably watched from somewhere beyond, probably approved, or disapproved, or simply understood that some choices couldn't be judged, only lived with. The recipe book sat on Nico's desk inside, all of Maria's love and memory preserved, in food and ink. And Sophie, keeper of that legacy, protector of those promises, had chosen to stay. To build a life in the space between violence and grace, to love a man who was both monster and protector, to honor a ghost who'd taught her that recipes were really love letters, and that keeping your word mattered more than keeping your life. Whether that choice was brave or foolish would remain to be seen. But it was made. And Sophie Chen, for the first time in her life, wasn't running from the hard thing. She was running toward it, and hoping that would make all the difference. 3 months later, Sophie's sweet shop reopened on a Tuesday morning in December. The line stretched down the block, neighbors who'd missed her cannoli, regulars who'd worried when she disappeared, and new customers drawn by word of mouth about the baker who'd survived something no one quite understood but everyone whispered about, Mrs. Kowalski was first through the door, exactly at 7 a.m., ready for her weekly order. Sophie served her with a smile, packed 6 perfect cannoli, refused to accept payment. "It's on the house today," Sophie said. "First day back. Everyone eats free. Mrs. Kowalski's eyes filled with tears. "I thought you were gone for good. Thought the city had eaten another small business. Almost," Sophie admitted. "But someone helped me remember why this place matters." She didn't specify who. Didn't mention the Mafia boss who'd paid off her debts, upgraded her equipment, hired private security that watched from across the street. Didn't mention the man who'd appeared in her life through a recipe book and changed everything. The bakery thrived. By noon, Sophie had sold more than she'd sold in any previous month. People wanted her food. Yes. But they also wanted the story. The woman who'd disappeared and come back stronger. The small business that survived. If they knew the real story, the violence, the danger, the man who'd killed to protect her, they probably wouldn't come. But they didn't know. And Sophie was content to let them believe in the simple version. The version where hard work and loyalty were rewarded, where keeping your word mattered, where small bakeries could survive in a city designed to crush them. At 3 p.m., the bell chimed, and Nico walked in. He wore a simple suit, looked almost normal, almost like just another customer instead of the most dangerous man in Brooklyn. "I'll take 6 cannoli," he said, playing along, "and whatever that is that smells like my childhood." "Biscotti," Sophie said, smiling. "Fresh batch. Your mother's recipe." Nico's expression softened. "Page 47, page 47. She boxed up the cannoli and biscotti, tied the box with string, handed it across the counter. Their fingers brushed. A connection. A promise kept. "You did it," Nico said quietly. "Saved the bakery. Built it back up." "We did it," Sophie corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." "You could have. You would have. You're the strongest person I know." "That's terrifying." "Why?" "Because you know a lot of very strong people. And most of them carry guns." Nico laughed. Actually laughed. Customers turned to look, drawn by the sound of this serious man in his expensive suit, laughing like a normal person enjoying a normal moment. "Come to dinner tonight," he said, still smiling. "Rosa's making pasta. She asks about you constantly. I'll be there." Sophie paused. "Will there be business? Or just dinner?" "Just dinner. It's Tuesday. I don't do business on Tuesdays anymore." "New rule?" "Your rule. You said I needed to build more instead of destroy. So Tuesdays are for building, for family, for remembering what matters." Sophie's chest tightened. "You're actually doing it. Trying to be more than just violence." "I'm trying, failing a lot, but trying." Nico leaned across the counter, lowered his voice so only she could hear. "You make me want to try. Make me want to be the person my mother believed I could be. That's a lot of pressure." "You can handle it. You walked into a crime boss's headquarters carrying a recipe book. You faced down Castellano. You drove a boat through a war zone. You can handle anything." He was right. Sophie had survived, had thrived. had built something good from the wreckage of that first day when she'd decided to keep a promise made 15 years ago. "I'll see you tonight," she said. Nico nodded, picked up his box of baked goods, headed for the door. Then he paused, turned back. "My mother would have loved you," he said quietly. "Would have loved what you've become. What you've helped me become. I hope so. I know so. Because you're exactly what she was trying to create when she taught you all those years ago. Someone who understands that food is love, that recipes are legacy, that keeping promises matters more than survival." He left before Sophie could respond. The bell chimed. The bakery continued its afternoon rush, and Sophie stood behind the round counter, selling cannoli and biscotti and pieces of legacy preserved in flour and sugar. That night, she went to dinner at Nico's mansion. Rosa had made enough pasta to feed an army. Vincent was there, and Marco, and several others from Nico's inner circle. They ate and laughed and told stories. Some dark, some funny, all human. After dinner, Nico led Sophie to the garden. Maria's roses had gone dormant for winter, but the structure remained. The promise of spring, the cycle continuing. "I have something for you," Nico said. He pulled out a small leather-bound book, new, but aged to look old. Expensive, but simple. Your own recipe book. To document your legacy the way my mother documented hers. Sophie opened it. The first page was blank, waiting for her words. Her memories, her love letters written in food and ink. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," Nico countered. "For keeping her promise. For walking into my world when you had every reason to run. For staying when staying was the hardest thing you could do." "I love you," Sophie said. Simple, true, terrifying. "I love you too," Nico replied, "which probably means I should let you go. Should protect you from my darkness. But you won't." "No. Because I'm selfish. And because you're the only light I've seen in 15 years. They kissed in Maria's garden, two people choosing each other despite every reason not to. Choosing hope over despair. Choosing to build instead of destroy. Choosing love in a world designed to kill such fragile things. And somewhere, perhaps, Maria Santoro's ghost smiled. Approved. Rested easy knowing that her son had found someone who could stand in his darkness without being consumed. Someone who understood that recipes were love letters. That promises mattered. That legacy was built one moment, one choice, one act of grace at a time. The recipe book Maria had left behind had done its job, had connected two people across 15 years, had preserved love in the only way love can, truly be preserved by being shared, being honored, being carried forward into new generations. Sophie began filling her new recipe book that night. First entry, biscotti, page 47. This is where it all began. This is where love found its way back home. And in the margins, she wrote, "Some promises take 15 years to keep, but they're worth it. They're always worth it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.